How to reverse type 2 diabetes naturally. Senior meal coach. Treating diabetes by lowering blood sugar alone is like treating a serious infection with Tylenol. Pause. The fever goes down. You feel a little better. But the infection? It's still there, quietly, getting worse. Now let me ask you something. If you've lived with diabetes for years and your doctor keeps saying your numbers look good, but every year you're prescribed more pills, more injections, more insulin, does that really feel like healing? Because here's something most people were never told. Blood sugar and diabetes are not the same thing, and that's why this is so confusing. Even people with well-controlled blood sugar are still developing heart disease, still losing kidney function, still struggling with nerve damage. So the question becomes uncomfortable. If the numbers look fine, why does the damage continue? I'm not here to scare you, and I'm not here to sell you anything. But if this sounds familiar, if it feels personal, stay with me for just a moment. What you're about to hear may completely change how you understand diabetes. People get confused because they think blood sugar and diabetes are the same thing, but they are not. Over time, you can see that no matter what you do, the condition keeps progressing. They call it a progressive disease. The true core of diabetes is insulin resistance. That is the part that gets worse. High blood sugar is really just a symptom of insulin resistance, but it is not the actual disease. The actual disease is resistance to insulin and the resulting very high insulin levels. Think of it like an infection. If you have a serious infection in your lungs, that is the disease. A fever is the symptom. You treat the disease with antibiotics. You do not treat the symptom by taking more and more acetaminophen. If the infection is severe, you need antibiotics, not increasing doses of acetaminophen. Diabetes works the same way. The disease is insulin resistance, but the symptom is high blood sugar. Yet most treatment is aimed at lowering blood sugar. So you can see that controlling blood sugar does not actually fix the problem because you are not treating the disease. The disease keeps progressing, and that is the real issue. Until about 5 years ago, we thought treating blood sugar would make you better. That is what most of you probably heard. Your blood sugar looks fine. Your blood sugar looks fine. If you believe blood sugar is the same thing as diabetes, then you think diabetes is doing fine. But about 5 years ago, 3 very large studies were done, and they found that whether blood sugar was well controlled or poorly controlled did not make a difference. People still developed diabetes complications. They still developed heart disease and strokes, as well as eye disease and kidney disease. None of that improved just by controlling blood sugar. If you think about it, you can see why. You are not treating the disease, only the symptom. Just like taking acetaminophen for an infection might make you look better, but it does not make you better. So diabetes is insulin resistance. You have to understand what causes insulin resistance, and then you have to treat that. You need to treat insulin resistance, not just blood sugar. At a certain point, if blood sugar is extremely high, yes, you must treat it. But that is not the most important part of the disease. The true core of the disease is insulin resistance. And because the causes of insulin resistance are not fully understood, it cannot be directly treated. So most treatments focus on blood sugar, including metformin. All the medications, all the glyburide, all the insulin, all of it is aimed at simply treating blood sugar. So here is the real question. What causes insulin resistance? This is what is happening in the body. This is just a simple illustration. Normally, insulin lowers blood sugar. When you eat, blood sugar rises and insulin is released to move sugar out of the blood and into the tissues. That is normal. When you develop insulin resistance, insulin does not seem to work as well. So the body increases insulin levels to make it work well enough to clear sugar from the bloodstream. High insulin levels are a result of insulin resistance. But what causes insulin resistance in the first place? That is what you need to understand in order to treat it, because if you know what causes insulin resistance, you can treat it. And it turns out that insulin itself causes insulin resistance. That might sound strange at first, but it is how most biological systems work. If you look at other hormones, repeated exposure leads the body to develop resistance to them. You see the same pattern with addictive drugs, alcohol, smoking, and many substances. The first dose creates a strong effect, but each additional dose produces a smaller effect. Over time, you have to take higher and higher doses to get the same effect. That is resistance or tolerance, and it happens with many drugs. Insulin behaves the same way. The more insulin you take, the more your body develops resistance to it. Now you can see it becomes a vicious cycle. If your insulin level is high, you develop some insulin resistance. As insulin resistance increases, insulin levels rise even more. As insulin levels rise, resistance increases further. It goes around and around. So in that sense, treatment with insulin is not just ineffective, it can actually make things worse because it feeds into that cycle. While insulin lowers blood sugar, it can also increase insulin resistance. In that way, it is making the underlying problem worse. You are increasing the disease process by taking insulin, and that is the real problem. When you understand the actual disease, you can see why standard treatment is not only ineffective, it can be very harmful. You are treating the disease with the very thing that is contributing to the disease, and that is not going to work. If the real problem is that insulin levels are too high, you are not going to fix it by taking more insulin. It is like treating alcoholism with alcohol. It is the same idea. With alcohol, the first drink gives a strong buzz, and each drink after that produces a weaker effect. You may feel temporarily better, but you are not improving alcoholism. In the same way, if the problem is excessive insulin, how could taking more insulin possibly help? The truth is, it was never truly helpful in that sense. In many cases, it made things worse, but people did not understand that. Because they did not understand it, they excused the outcomes by calling diabetes a chronic progressive disease. But diabetes is not necessarily a chronic progressive disease because we know it can be reversed in many cases. For example, with weight loss surgery, gastric banding, or bariatric surgery, when the stomach is reduced in size, diabetes goes away in about 90% of cases. So this was not an inevitable progressive disease, this is a reversible disease. So if diabetes is reversible, yet our treatment is making people worse, the only logical conclusion is that our treatment approach is completely wrong, incorrect, and that is exactly what it is. So when you think about treating diabetes, there are a few things you have to consider. First, you have to understand that the key to treating diabetes is not to take more insulin. That makes things worse. The key is how you are going to get insulin levels really low. Second, diabetes is almost certainly a dietary disease. And if it is a dietary disease, then the cure has to be dietary. You cannot take a dietary disease, treat it with drugs, and pretend that will make it better. But that is what we have done. We have taken a disease that is dietary in nature and prescribed drugs that suppress the symptoms. That is not going to make it better, and it has not. The last 30 years have shown that. Third, this is not a chronic progressive disease at all. This is actually a curable disease, but you have to treat it the right way. You have to understand what you are doing. One of the things we do in our clinic is look for ways to lower insulin levels, because that is the real target. One of the simpler ways to do that is intermittent fasting. That is why we have many people following these kinds of protocols. One thing to remember is that fasting has been practiced for many, many years. People hear about it and think it sounds crazy at first. But fasting has been done for thousands and thousands of years, and almost every major religion in the world includes prescribed periods of fasting, not for any one specific reason, but because people recognized it was a healthy practice to do from time to time. Why is it healthy? Because when you fast, insulin levels drop very low. You are not eating, so insulin goes down. Having periods when insulin is low helps prevent that vicious cycle. Insulin leads to resistance, which leads to higher insulin. It is a vicious cycle. So if once in a while you observe something like Ramadan, which is a month of fasting, or the 40 days of Lent, or whatever the practice is, you create a period when insulin levels are very low. That can break the vicious cycle. If you do that routinely throughout the year, you stay healthier. You help prevent the development of insulin resistance. If you do not develop resistance, you do not develop high insulin levels. That is the idea. Now I'm going to show you what we do as a demonstration. You can think about blood sugar this way. The body can store energy in two main ways. When you eat, you are taking in energy as food. You can store that energy as sugar, and you can store it as fat. Sugar is stored in the liver as glycogen. There is a limited amount of glycogen you can store in the liver, but it is readily available. It is like short-term storage. If you store more energy than that, the body turns it into fat. That is long-term energy storage. As long as you are eating, you are burning some energy, but you are also increasing insulin. Insulin tells your body to store some of that energy. If you have too much sugar, some of it will go into storage. And as long as your storage capacity is not full, it will not spill over into the bloodstream. What I am going to do is demonstrate it this way. Normally, when you eat a small amount, if your sugar stores are not already full, what happens is that you fill them a little bit, and that is fine. For example, you eat dinner and take in more calories than you can use during that period of time. Your body produces insulin, and insulin tells the body, I ate a big meal. I will use a little of that as energy. The rest I'm going to put into storage as sugar, because that is what I do. So it fills up the storage, but if the storage is empty, that is fine. Then you go to sleep. For the next 9 to 12 hours, you are not eating. So your body takes what was stored and burns it off as energy. That is the normal situation. Now, what happens in the diabetic situation is different. Over time, as you continue to eat more and more, that storage gradually gets filled up. Here is the situation in diabetes. Your sugar storage levels are completely full. When you eat, you take in a meal and bring in more sugar. Because the storage is already full, the extra sugar spills over into the blood. So your blood sugar levels go up. There is nothing your body can do with it because it cannot store any more. For a while your body can compensate, but now you are diabetic, and this is what happens. At every mealtime, your storage is full, and every time you eat, the sugar spills into the blood. So what does insulin do? If you take insulin to deal with that problem, your body takes that excess sugar and forces it back into the body. What happens to it then? Your body stores it as fat. In other words, insulin makes you gain weight. And if you have ever taken insulin, you already know that is exactly what happens. But here is the problem. If you keep doing this day after day, year after year, all you do is gain weight. It does not make you better because all that sugar is still in your body. It is like that television show about hoarders. People hoard too much stuff and their house becomes completely full. Pretty soon, the stuff spills out. If you are taking insulin, all you are doing is taking all that garbage and shoving it back into the house. That is not going to help. That is not going to make things better. In fact, over time, it just makes things worse. And that is exactly what happens in the current treatment of diabetes. So this is what we do instead. If your cup is completely full, the only rational treatment is to start draining it. That is the situation in diabetes. Your cup is completely full. The only way you are going to get better is to drain it off. So when you fast, a little bit of that stored fuel comes out and gets burned off. The next time you fast, a little bit more comes out and gets drained off. Every single time you do it, more gets burned. When you eat, it fills back up a little bit, but as you continue, eventually your stores come down, and it will not spill over into the blood. You are basically forcing the body to burn off that stored sugar. As you do that, you reduce the stores of sugar and you get better. Your diabetes improves because now you are burning it off. It is like the hoarder example again. Instead of shoving the garbage back into the house, which is what insulin does, we are going to throw it out. That is really the reason we do this. You have to lower insulin levels, but you also have to get rid of that stored sugar. You stored too much, and it was not stored over a month. It was stored over 10 years, so it is not going to reverse in a week or a month or 2 months. Even so, if you fast every day, it will reverse faster because you are getting rid of that sugar every day. So this is what we do. The first case is Richard. He has had diabetes for about 10 years and he developed several complications, including kidney disease. He was referred to the Intensive Dietary Management Program and we started working with him in June 2013. We placed him on a fasting regimen based on how much insulin he was using. His weight started a little above 250 pounds and steadily decreased to 210 pounds. His waist size also continued to go down. His hemoglobin A1C, which measures long-term blood sugar control, stayed relatively stable below 7%. He began at 55 units of insulin, and within 6 weeks he was able to stop insulin completely. In other words, his blood sugars were doing fine, and he was off all diabetes medications. His A1C was no longer at a level that would qualify him as diabetic. You could say that his diabetes was effectively reversed using this straightforward approach. You can see that this is both a rational and a natural way to reverse diabetes. We are not talking about adding more and more drugs. In some places, they will tell you to take experimental medications and try to enroll you in drug trials. That is not what we are doing. What we are doing has been practiced for thousands of years, and it is essentially the same way diabetes used to be treated, because people understood it was a dietary disease and needed to be addressed with dietary measures. The second case is Raj. He was diagnosed with diabetes in 2003, and he also had complications. After treating him the wrong way for many years, I started him in the Intensive Dietary Management Program. He started in August. His weight has come down a bit. He began at 186 pounds and lost about 8 to 10 pounds. His waist size has also decreased, but you can see that his blood sugar control, measured by hemoglobin A1C, has remained very good. Now look at his medications. He started at a little over 40 units of insulin per day. Within 5 to 7 weeks, he was down to 0. He was no longer taking insulin, and he was no longer taking any medications for his diabetes. Again, if your blood sugars are good and you are not taking any medications, you could say the diabetes has been reversed. In essence, what we are doing is similar to what happens with stomach stapling surgery. The diabetes reversal rates after that surgery are around 90%, but the benefit comes largely from the forced reduction in eating. They make the stomach smaller, so you cannot eat, which means you are essentially fasting. If the benefits come from fasting, then why do the surgery at all? It does not even make sense. Just do the fasting. The key is to lower insulin levels. There is more than one way to do it. We use intermittent fasting because it is a very simple way to do it, but there are actually a number of ways to reduce insulin, because that is the real key. Insulin is what drives type 2 diabetes. What is also interesting is that insulin drives obesity, and that is why the two go together. They share the same cause. Whether you are here for weight loss or you are here for diabetes, both problems come from the same thing. They are diseases of too much insulin. If you understand they are diseases of too much insulin, then you can say that is useful to know, because now I need to know how we are going to reduce insulin levels. That is the key. Intermittent fasting is one way. The second way is to reduce refined carbohydrates in your diet. Carbohydrates tend to raise insulin levels very high, so they are something you should cut back on. There are also several protective factors, meaning factors that protect against rising insulin. One of those is a high-fat diet, which is very interesting because for many years you have probably heard you should eat a low-fat diet. What I am saying is that was not good for you because fat can help protect you by keeping insulin levels down. Fiber does something similar. High-fiber diets also help protect against rises in insulin. Vinegar may help as well. Many traditional foods are high in vinegar, like pickled foods, and those may be protective. Certain spices may also help. Cinnamon, turmeric, and some other spices may play a role. Some people also use other extracts like bitter melon juice, which is the same general idea. There are probably natural compounds that can help protect against rising insulin. But the key is that no matter how you do it, it is done in the same way. Reduce insulin levels. You can do it with fasting, or you can do it with very low carbohydrate diets. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Senior Meal Coach for more science-backed tips to stay strong and independent after 60. Remember this. Aging doesn't have to mean getting weaker. With the right daily habits, you can wake up every morning feeling stronger. The choice is yours. Have a blessed day, and as always, breathe easy, my friend.